I'm going to start this review by saying I'm typically forgiving when critiquing indie and budget titles. I'd take a short, janky, but mechanically engaging indie title over any AAA experience that amounts to little more than rote gameplay sections between lavishly overproduced and overwritten cutscenes. However, even if I set the bar low, Crypt of the Serpent King Remastered 4K edition is still just a simple upscaling of an already shallow game. I'd usually start by discussing any narrative elements, but there's nothing to say. Despite seemingly drawing inspiration from classic DC dungeon crawlers and blobbers from the late 80s and early 90s, Crypt of the Serpent King offers not even the slightest hint of narrative context. Is each level you tackle part of the titular crypt? Why is each level patrolled exclusively by one type of creature? And who designed the doors to take a dozen keys to unlock? All you get is a how-to-play sub-menu, which outlines the basics. Collect the keys, defeat monsters for XP, loot chests for golden food, fight the boss, and then move on to the next level. The lack of narrative elements would be more forgivable if the gameplay loop was more compelling, but Crypt of the Serpent King quickly reveals its mechanical depth, what little there is, and then seems content to drag out the experience with increasingly long key hunts in each successive level. You stomp around slowly in first person, engage in simplistic and repetitive battles, collect X number of keys while avoiding some rudimentary hazards, open the gate to the boss, and defeat them after a bout of equally uninspired combat. Given exploration involves little more than moving forward, sometimes with a smidgen of timing or pushing the jump button, the combat is presumably the core gameplay element. I'll admit I was initially confused by the system, and fell quickly to basic foes on the first level when trading blows. However, I soon realized the werewolf-looking creatures could be baited into an attack, easily dodged by backpedaling, and then struck with a follow-up blow. Repeat twice, and it was over. What I didn't expect was that the same approach would work for the first boss, the enemies in the second level, then the second boss, and so forth. Sure, some enemies have a flurry of attacks or greater reach, but that just means you have to backpedal further or wait slightly longer before counterattacking. The only threat came from aggroing multiple foes, something that's tough to do given their spacing, backing myself into the corner of a compact boss arena, or simply getting bored and playing recklessly. New weapons typically offer higher damage and improved reach, and you can unlock 2 range variants with limited ammunition per level, but they ultimately feel unnecessary. Even playing on hard difficulty, with no health-restoring food found in chests, it's more than manageable once you've mastered this bait-and-counter rhythm. What I didn't expect was the roguelite structure and a surprisingly balanced progression system. At the end of each level, you can invest the gold you've collected into new gear and spend XP on increasing 3 attributes that allow you to do more damage, take less damage, and move ever so slightly faster. Die, and you're back to the start of the current level with your XP and gold lost, unless you're playing on easy. Now, if you're someone who systematically explores each level, you'll find there's always enough gold and XP on offer to buy the next most expensive weapon and upgrade each attribute once. The downside to this design is that each level ends up playing out the same way, with enemies doing much the same damage and falling to the same number of blows, simply reinforcing the sense of repetition. Another element that can often work in the favor of an indie or budget game is a distinct aesthetic, something Crypt of the Serpent King lacks. The procedural generation system produces large but barren levels, blighted by a severe lack of diversity when it comes to textures, enemy designs, and props. Given the number of free 3D asset libraries, it's remarkable the levels are barren enough to pass for something from the PS2 era. In combat, taking damage results in an obnoxious red haze obscuring your vision, while dealing damage to enemies triggers only the briefest recoil animation, making it difficult to tell if you've hit or missed. Environments, weapons, monsters, they all look much sharper in this remastered 4K edition, albeit in a smoothed over and crudely upscaled sort of way. Unfortunately, the movement is always sluggish, even after several attribute upgrades, and combat animations lack impact, leaving melee combat particularly unsatisfying. What I did find somewhat impressive was the dynamic, tension-inducing soundtrack. The tracks don't vary wildly from level to level, but they have an unsettling effect similar to the classic Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. It's music that's not exactly subtle, but effective in generating atmosphere. They are coupled with a draw distance that ensures everything beyond 10 meters is shrouded in darkness, so the music often ramps up just as an enemy emerges from the gloom ahead of you. Of course, this means more unsatisfying, badly animated combat, and the impact is quickly lost. Now, while I might not have much of a nostalgic hook for classic PC dungeon crawlers like Eye of the Beholder or Ultima Underworld, I am a huge fan of modern titles like Legend of Grimrock and Vaporum. Now, maybe that's an unfairly high standard to compare Crypt of the Serpent King against, given it costs the same as a cup of takeaway coffee, but it feels like the developers only built the most basic foundations of a game, and then shipped it, repeatedly. I had hoped for something budget but smartly built, not budget but rudimentary. All things considered, the group that might enjoy Crypt of the Serpent King, this remastered 4K edition, are achievement hunters, You could get the dozen or so on offer in a single 2-hour easy difficulty run if you so wanted. For everyone else, lay off the coffee for a few days and save up for any number of better dungeon crawlers.